Hello, my name's Margaret Holbrook and I've been asked by Cheshire East Libraries to help them celebrate National Storytelling Week. So I'd like to tell you a story that I've written, and it's called Crow Song. For 7 years she watched them as they raised their young, watched as the chicks grew from awkward gawky balls of blackness, left the nest and fledged. For 7 years she watched all this. She saw how the adult pair flew together for the rest of the year, partners. And she saw how lovingly he groomed his mate until her feathers shone in the sunlight. She knew his call. She knew his walk and his white marked tail feather, and she wondered whether it was age, this greyness. For 7 years she waved her husband off to work, stood on the path, watched and waved while he drove down the road, turned the corner and vanished from sight. For 7 years she did all this. She was sure and never missed a day. And in the autumn of the 7th year, as she stood and waved her husband off to work and watched until he disappeared from view, she didn't go in, but she stood and looked upward, and she saw the crow on the rooftops, and he was alone, and he was cawing and bowing as if to her, and she watched him. And she saw that he was picking the soft green moss from between the roof slates. And she saw him and smiled, and he cawed, and he watched her. The morning was dark, but split with light, as some autumn mornings are. He was caught in the brightness of the shards, and he watched her. And he cawed, and she heard him and smiled. Then she turned, walked into the house and closed the door. She was alone. He knew all this, because for 7 years he had watched her. He knew her wave. He knew the soft sound of her voice, knew that she loved autumn best of all the seasons. Later, and when evening began to fall, she watched as the birds flew across the sky to the roosts. They were calling and cawing, but it was his call she heard, and she listened, and she watched as he flew across the sky to the tall trees whose winter coat was almost cast. The tall trees who offered little shelter to him. And she watched him, and up in the tall trees he cawed. She listened, and he watched her, and for 7 more evenings he watched her. For 7 nights after 7 years he watched her, and he was alone. And in the morning, and for 7 more mornings, he watched her. And she watched him, and saw that he was picking the moss from between the roof slates. And he gathered the moss and took it to the tall trees, and there he lined a nest with the soft green moss. And as she stood on the path, waved her husband off to work, and watched until he disappeared, he watched her. And this morning she didn't go inside. Not today, not on this day. She stood on the path and she watched him. And he flew down to her, and he called her name, and she knew it, even though it was just her call, just his call. and she went to him. And he was as a man, and he took her in his wings that shone blue-black in the sunlight. And she went with him, and her husband lost her. But her husband never knew it was she, following him as he disappeared round the corner each morning to work, and he never knew that it was her call. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that story, and if you'd like to visit my website, it's margaretholbrookauthor.weebly.com, and there's all kinds of details on there, and you will find my books also in Cheshire Libraries. Put my glasses on for this next line, which is, look out for more storytelling videos from Cheshire East Libraries coming soon. Thank you.